Welcome back, everyone. We have a great segment in store. First off, we'll be talking about Mayor Bill DeBlasio declining to bring in the National Guard, saying New York City does not need the National Guard, and some of the backlash that has already taken place from those comments. We're also going to be talking about some of the suspicious arrests that have been taking place around the country, and also some very suspicious weapon caches that have been found at some of these protest sites. And jumping back to a different topic today, we're going to be talking about China again. President Donald Trump has signed an executive order on global religious freedom, and this could be a major blow to the Chinese Communist Party. I'll be explaining why that is. So these stories and more, so stick around. Before we get started, please, if you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Again, need your support on this channel. We are being censored. For example, some of the recent videos have been demonetized by YouTube. So again, really need your support, folks. And if you want to go the extra mile, really spread the videos, tell your friends about the channel. Again, really helps us. Now that said, let's jump into it. So you might have seen the story, very likely Mayor Bill DeBlasio said New York City does not need the National Guard. And he's gotten a lot of backlash from this already, and we'll go into some of the backlash in this segment. Now first off, I'm going to be going over an Epoch Times article explaining what exactly has happened. So this is a story. It says, quote, New York City Mayor Bill DeBlasio declined to accept help from the National Guard. Governor Andrew Cuomo said, as the governor mused that he could displace his fellow Democrat and take over his duties. Now, Bill DeBlasio said he does not need the National Guard. That New York City does not need the National Guard. I'll show a quote of him now talking about this.
That is a dangerous scenario. So I want to just put down the marker. The National Guard should not be brought here. We have 36,000 police officers. They are the best equipped to deal with this situation. And you know what will help them deal with the situation? Not the National Guard. The people of New York City are much more powerful than anything the National Guard could do.
So again, that's the New York City mayor, and the New York governor seems to think otherwise.
You have 38,000 NYPD people. It is the largest police department in the United States of America. Use 38,000 people and protect property. Use the police, protect property and people. Look at the videos. It was a disgrace. I believe that.
Now, Cuomo also suggested that he could remove DeBlasio based on the powers of the governor. He said, quote, technically, the governor could remove a mayor, but you have to file charges, and then there's an acting mayor. I don't know what's ever been done. And notably, DeBlasio did not immediately respond to requests for comment from the Epoch Times based on Cuomo's statements against him. But he did speak shortly before at City Hall, where he said most people protesting were peaceful and want change. He said, quote, and we will make that change, but we will not tolerate violence of any kind. We will not tolerate attacks on police officers. We will not tolerate hatred being created. And now, notably, this criticism and, say, back and forth between DeBlasio and Cuomo is not uncommon. Yes, they're both Democrats. Yes, they're part of the same camp, but they don't see eye to eye. They do go back and forth like this on a lot of issues, so this isn't out of character for them technically. Let's go into a bit of why this matters. So it's unclear, first off, what change exactly DeBlasio is talking about making in New York City. He's saying these people demand change, and New York City will make that change. Now, when it comes to race relations in New York, this has been a big issue for a very long time. But if there's been a lot of criticism that the actions they've taken to try to solve this have had the opposite effect, that it's created a type of lawlessness that have made a lot of these communities less safe. Now, some of the big critics against this are the NYPD themselves, talking about how they've had their hands tied behind their backs. Now, here's a quote from the Sergeants Benevolent Association, which represents close to 13,000 active and retired NYPD sergeants. Now, they said back in February that the NYPD would declare war on DeBlasio. And this was after an individual allegedly tried to assassinate a police officer. It was a surprise attack, almost killed him. That was in February. Now, here's what they said. They wrote on Twitter at the time, Mayor DeBlasio, the members of the NYPD are declaring war on you. We do not respect you. Do not visit us in hospitals. You sold the NYPD. And he continues on this. We'll get into some of the current things they said. Now the SBA has issued an open letter to the New York City Police Commissioner demanding leadership and direction amidst these riots. And so remember now that Cuomo's criticism is against the NYPD and DeBlasio. The NYPD themselves are coming out against DeBlasio, and they're saying that the NYPD cannot handle the situation. DeBlasio's statements on why we don't need the National Guard in New York is based on his claims that the NYPD can handle it. And the NYPD is saying otherwise. Here's what they're saying in their open letter. They say, quote, police officers in NYC are, quote, literally under sustained and unprovoked attack from violent protesters in the street, from the governor's office, whose statements against police officers statewide emboldens further rioting. Now, notably on this claim, these riots, a lot of them, at least the surface catalyst of this, was, attacks against police violence. This interpretation that police violence is targeting blacks especially. Now, they believe that adding fuel to the flame, calling out the NYPD and further criticism of the NYPD is making it harder for them. Because as these riots continue, it's the NYPD and police officers who need to go out and try to fix things. And if they're perceived as the enemy, even when you have government officials calling them the enemy and making it even worse, how do you expect them to quell the situation when the individuals who are viewed as the problem are the ones trying to act as the solution? This is the point they're making here, again, their opinion. They talk about a lack of city leadership, and they said this has failed to demand much needed reinforcement to restore order and take back the city. And from the lack of clear and direct instruction from the NYPD hierarchy on how police officers are expected to restore calm. So in other words, officers on the ground do not feel any level of support, not from the mayor, not from the governor, not from their leadership, and especially not from the individuals they're trying to quell the situation with. They feel they're being besieged and attacked from every direction. Now the letter goes on. It goes over some of the direct criticisms DeBlasio has made against the NYPD and police officers. In fact, the longer it continues, the more emboldened the anarchists who have taken over the city become. What this department cannot do is stay the course. Our efforts to take back the city from the lawless have thus far failed miserably. Now decisive and resolute measures must be implemented to enable us to restore order immediately, without further destruction or injury. Now, again, what this shows is the NYPD itself is basically saying the same thing Cuomo is saying when it comes to the claims that the situation is not okay in New York. The NYPD themselves are saying that no, they cannot, as opposed to what DeBlasio said. They are not able to handle the situation. The NYPD itself is saying they cannot handle the situation. Cuomo was also saying the NYPD cannot handle the situation. And he's criticizing DeBlasio just as the NYPD is. DeBlasio's excuse for not bringing in the National Guard or declining having the National Guard in New York City is based on his claim that the NYPD can handle it. Again, the NYPD says they cannot. Now, notably, DeBlasio's call to not do this also has pretty serious implications for New York because even after he said this, the same night there were more attacks. Not just looting, not just these breaking of vandalism, but also direct attacks on police officers and other individuals, even fellow protesters, fellow rioters in New York were attacked. Now we'll show some videos of some of these. There was a New York City police officer run over in the Bronx, for example. We'll show a video of this now.
Oh! That's a fucking cop! Oh, shit! They killed him! Oh my God!
Now, DeBlasio would also criticize some of the police officers for allegedly pulling their guns on some of the protesters, but a video came out showing the fuller context of that the officers were randomly attacked right before this happened. We'll show a video of what happened now.
You need to chill, bro!
Now, at the same time, based on DeBlasio's claim that the NYPD has the situation under control, there have been a lot of arrests. We'll show some of the perp walks now, some of the different individuals being taken in for booking. I mean, hundreds of protesters have been arrested. You could argue that the New York City police have done a pretty significant job in making arrests. Now, with this said, though, a lot of these individuals are allegedly back on the street within 24 hours, and that's because of two different things. First off, there are these different organizations financing the bails, different celebrities paying the bails, different organizations paying the bails, and also alleged subsidized legal representation from some different groups tied to these tied to some of the protest groups on the street. And at the same time, there was also bail reform in New York, which basically has a lot of these individuals back out on the streets within 24 hours. And so while the police, yes, they have been making arrests, there's also a lot of claims and criticism against some of these different issues, notably this bail reform and notably individuals paying to have their bail posted, that yes, they're arresting them, but these same individuals are back on the street right after. And notably as well, a lot of the individuals they're arresting are those who were basically committing crimes, those not just peaceful protesters, individuals who were involved at least in groups that were out committing crimes. Those are the ones being targeted mostly. Now, at the same time, it seems even the protesters themselves are unhappy with DeBlasio. There were it looked like thousands, at least, of protesters outside Gracie Mansion, where DeBlasio and his family stay. We'll show some videos of this in just a bit. But notably, this is a quote from Newsmax columnist James Hurst, and he said, quote, "Mobs are reportedly close to breaching Gracie Mansion where DeBlasio resides." And we'll show a video of this now of thousands of these protesters calling for the resignation of Mayor Bill de Blasio. Now, as I mentioned in the previous episode, there are a lot of different groups among these protests. This is not a single protest. It's not a single ideology out on the streets. The individuals protesting in front of Gracie Mansion very likely have their own concerns. They are unhappy with the way de Blasio has handled things. I mean, even before this, a lot of communities in New York have been complaining of the lawlessness that has taken over the city because of some of the reforms Bill de Blasio has made around law enforcement, notably, for example, this bail reform. At the same time, too, even some of the protesters directly involved in the front line of the protests are mad at de Blasio because, for example, there were cases of them being locked on bridges and mass arrested. So they are angry at some of the arrests that have taken place as well. There's a lot of pressure on de Blasio from all directions. Now, that said, let's jump into some of the other issues we've seen across the country. There have been some very suspicious arrests and also some very suspicious weapon caches that have been found. Now, you may remember in the previous episode we showed some of these pallets of bricks that are apparently being left at protest sites, and notably left in areas where there's no apparent construction nearby. And so what are these bricks for? There have been reports now coming out of unmarked vehicles dropping off these bricks, cars without license plates dropping off these bricks. We'll be going over that in a future episode. But for now, let's look at some of the other strange incidents we've been seeing. So first off, this is from Bill Melligan, Fox News, saying that they've learned that LAPD arrested 31-year-old Gregory Wong in DTLA this morning while dressed as / impersonating National Guard. He was armed to the teeth and was booked on assault weapons charges. LAPD says federal charges may come next. Sources confirm these photos. This is an article on that from Fox News. They say, quote, "The Los Angeles Police Department said that Gregory Wong, 31, was arrested near the intersection of East 1st Street and North Main Street around 1:30 a.m. Tuesday. The location is right across from the Los Angeles Police Department headquarters and City Hall." They say authorities told Fox 11 that the suspect was dressed in National Guard apparel and had multiple weapons on him at the time of the arrest. They say that Wong was booked on charges for manufacturing and distribution of assault weapons. He is currently being held on a $50,000 bond. Now, a couple points on this. First off, it's not unusual for some of the patriot types to come out dressed in military, paramilitary-like garb and with firearms to come back up police or do things like that. They do things like this. Also, it's not uncommon for some people to have large, quote, weapons caches. I've personally, growing up in San Diego, know many people who own many legal firearms and think it's very normal, and that's their opinion, to have large weapons caches. So that it doesn't necessarily mean he was up to something bad. What is unusual about this case is that he was dressed like the National Guard, notably right when Trump calls on these different governors to send in the National Guard. And there's, of course, concern, again, analysis, just concern that maybe this individual is going to try to start an incident. That is the reason why this video, these images are going viral around this individual. They're concerned of what he was dressing as a National Guard officer or trooper may have been for. Why was he dressed as National Guard? Now, moving on. In Columbus, police seized a bus that was suspected of bringing weapons to supply the riots. This is a quote from the story. Columbus Division of Police wrote on Facebook, quote, "This bus was stopped yesterday at Broad Street and 3rd due for obstruction of traffic. There was a suspicion of supplying riot equipment to rioters." And at the same time, too, the United States Park Service, the United States Parks Police wrote on June 2nd, they had a statement on this saying, quote, The United States Parks Police is committed to the peaceful expression of First Amendment rights. However, this past weekend's demonstration at Lafayette Park across the National Mall included activities that were not part of a peaceful protest, which resulted in injuries to USPP officers in the line of duty, the obstruction of public property, and the defacing of memorials and monuments. And here's where it gets interesting. They say during 4 days of demonstrations, 51 members of the USPP were injured. Of those, 11 were transported to the hospital and released, and 3 were admitted. Now, notably, when it comes to some of the weapons being used, let's talk about this now. They say on Monday, June 1st, the USPP worked with the United States Secret Service to have temporary fencing installed inside Lafayette Park. At approximately 6:33 p.m., violent protesters on 8th Street Northwest began throwing projectiles, including bricks, frozen water, and, quote, bottles and caustic liquids. What are these caustic liquids? And they continue, quote, the protesters also climbed onto a historic building at the north end of Lafayette Park that was destroyed by arson days prior. And also on this note, too, of these suspicious weapons caches and different arrests. This is from the Federal Criminal Complaint, Justice Department. Federal Criminal Complaint charges Illinois' man with traveling to Minnesota to riot, possession of explosive devices. And it says, quote, United States Attorney Eric H. McDonald today announced a federal criminal complaint against Matthew Lee Rupert, 28, charging him with civil disorder, carrying on a riot, and possession of unregistered destructive devices, these explosives allegedly. They say, quote, according to the allegations in the complaint, in the video, which allegedly shows him, Rupert stated, quote, they got SWAT trucks up here. I've got some bombs if some of you all want to throw them back. Bomb them back. Here I got some more. Light it and throw it. Now, changing topics a bit, back to China. We haven't done China reporting for a bit now because of these protests. We'll be getting more into that as things develop. The Trump administration has signed an executive order on religious freedom. And this is a big, big deal, global religious freedom, when it comes to the Chinese Communist Party. So I'll go over an article on this and explain why this is such a big deal. This is from the Epoch Times. It says, quote, President Donald Trump signed an executive order on June 2nd to prioritize religious freedom in U.S. foreign policy and assistance programs. Religious freedom for all people worldwide is a foreign policy of the United States, the order states, and it continues, and the United States will respect and vigorously promote this freedom. And it says, within 6 months of the date of the order, the Secretary of State, together with the administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, is to, quote, develop a plan to prioritize international religious freedom in the planning and implementation of United States foreign policy and in the foreign assistance programs of the Department of State and USAID. And it continues. I'll read a bit more of this and explain some of the analysis on this. The article states the new order also allocates at least $50 million per year for programs that promote international religious freedom. And here's where it gets very interesting. It says the Treasury Department may also consider sanctions on individuals involved in religious persecution by implementing the Global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act, among other things. Notably, you may remember some different senators were calling for the use of the Magnitsky Act against some Chinese Chinese officials when it comes to Hong Kong, when it comes to some of the abuses they've had there. Now they're talking about this on a broader scale when it comes to human rights abuses based on religious persecution. It continues here. The law empowers the U.S. government to place visa bans and block the assets of human rights abusers and corrupt officials around the world. Now, notably, again, for the Chinese Communist Party, this could be a death blow. This is, when it comes to religious abuse, the abuse of religious believers in China, the Chinese Communist Party is the biggest religious abuser in the world. Now, among the groups that they persecute, Tibetan Buddhists, where they move into Tibet and they've been brutally persecuting them for a long time now, burning down temples, tearing down different areas, using them as, putting them in these forced labor camps, you name it. The Muslim Uyghurs in Xinjiang, in the Xinjiang region of China, where they're using them as slaves. They have slave labor camps of these Muslim Uyghurs. They're using them for other forms of horrible things, torture, you name it. Falun Gong practitioners, about 100 million of them in China, persecuted, trying to be good people, believing in truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance, persecuted for trying to be good people. Re-education through labor, forced organ harvesting while they're still alive. These things have been proven now. These are among the many abuses the Chinese regime carries out against religious believers. And also house Christians, notably there are also about 100 million Christians in China. And if you support the religion that's not controlled by the Chinese regime, because they do have state-approved versions of these religions which are altered, then you can be persecuted. The house Christians are the ones who follow the true religion, the one we practice in the West, which is different from the one the Chinese Communist Party promotes, where you can't acknowledge a power higher than the state. If the United States goes after the individuals who have been engaged in these religious persecutions, you're talking about not just about the entire leadership of the Chinese Communist Party that could be taken down or at least called out on this. You're also talking about local officials. You're talking about different police forces, 610 office, for example, the extrajudicial police branch called the Gestapo of China, for example, that was created specifically to persecute Falun Gong. You're also talking about many, many other systems they've created to do this, possibly even some Western businesses that have created technologies being used in these persecutions. So this is no minor thing. And I've written before, I don't think I've said it on the show, the Chinese Communist Party has a glass jaw. As big as they talk, as big of a deal as they make about how strong they are in these things, they have a glass jaw. They are a paper tiger. Because when it comes down to it, here's their weakness. Their weakness is ideology. They are a regime whose hands are covered in blood. Right? 50 million to 70 million under Mao Zedong alone. Hundreds of millions persecuted in China right now as we speak for religious belief. And so if the United States wants to call them out on this, if they want to call them out on this, really this could be internationally a move that just does away with the entire soft power campaign the CCP has been pushing for decades. Does away possibly with, say, some of the different financial crimes these individuals have been committing around the world, takes away their finances, hits them ideologically. If they travel abroad, maybe even arresting them. We'll have to see what this means. But nothing minor. This is a big, big deal when it comes to the Chinese Communist Party. Now, folks, again, if you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. This channel does get censored. For example, some of our recent videos have been censored. We're not getting advertisements on some of them. Again, really need your support. If you want to go the extra mile, please tell a friend or family member about this show. Share it among your friends. Again, really, really need your support and also really appreciate it. That said, folks, please take care of yourselves. Please stay safe, stay healthy. We'll see you next time.